God, that is so great. This is such a terrific conference. You know, it starts out that first of all, it's a hand-picked group, right? I mean, they went through a lot of applicants before they got to you people, I just want to say. But it feels like, I mean, it feels like a family almost immediately. We have conversations with one another, and you know, I see a whole bunch of faces with whom I've already spoken, which is really great. I'm going to talk about something today, as you can see as the title out front has said. It's something that is not such an easy topic to talk about. It's not very often spoken about, in fact. But it's laced through almost every presentation that I've seen so far. And you and I had a conversation about it, Ron, earlier. Let me just start with yours, which is trust, respect, patience. I love this one from Frank. Soft system tools. Soft system tools. Where do you buy those? Excuse me, really. It says humanizing, being open, and of course, listening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this topic that is difficult to talk about. I'm going to flesh it out a little bit, give a description of what it is how I look at that. And we're going to talk about a project that it was essential to embody. So how we are matters. I'm going to begin with a little story. And it's a story that I heard from actually one of my children, who heard it from David Foster Wallace. Does anyone know who David Foster Wallace is? The story is two fish are swimming along, and this old wise fish, that would not be me, by the way, swims up to them and says, "So boys, how's the water?" They swim on a little further, and one turns to the other and says, "What is water?" So this is the problem that we face, that our water is so ubiquitous that we cannot see it. And I have to say that I feel that this topic is to a certain extent one that you all know so well already, as I've talking to you, John, as being the one who didn't speak directly about what you did, but was how you were, what you embodied, that made an enormous difference. And this is the topic that we're going to speak about. Now, when we speak about water, so the point is that the most obvious important realities are often the hardest to see and to talk about. So when we speak about water, we know that there's a whole range of possibilities. And right now in this room, of course, we are embodying something along this spectrum, from Poland Springs to Flint, Michigan. So hopefully there are not too many people in the room who are on the Flint and Michigan side. In fact, I'm sure they're not. Most of you are in the Poland Springs side. The point I would make, however, is that we choose the water that we swim in. We may not choose it intentionally. In fact, I would argue that most of you who are embodying these traits that I just spoke about do it intuitively. But subconsciously, we're also selecting the water around us, and we bring it to absolutely everything we do. Now, over the course of the last, we've only been here 24 hours or so. My God. A lot has happened in 24 hours. Holy smokes, my mind is actually blown by this. We've had a range of things spoken about, from the lineup of the chairs, which, by the way, we experienced the custodian coming back in and lining up the desk night after night. Not because they were union, but we thought that's the way it was supposed to be. So that actually does happen and still happens, and it endures. And all the way to the incredible bright spots that have been spoken about, which are an extraordinary inspiration. We know, however, that most of the schools in the country, in fact, the people who need to be at this conference, and Stan and I were talking about this, and by the way, I didn't mention yours, which was, did I mention patience? Yeah, Stan was the one who, where is he? He's got to be here someplace. Ah, there he is. That was a great conversation, by the way. That most of the people who really need to be here aren't here, lamentably. Still, and I'm going to continue obviously with this topic, even though I think most of you intuitively know what it's about. To a certain extent, the reason why we come to these conferences is not only to learn something new, but to remember why it is we do what we do. And I want to encourage you and all of you who are practicing a real conscious how we are in the world and making a difference on that level. I just want to point that out, that really comes before absolutely everything else. So there are boundless resources. I want to hire this kid, by the way. This guy, the more I can look at him. And it's something that we, of course, have an extraordinary bounty. Another thing that you and I just talked about was the question is how we're going to bring our resources, our creativity into the world. It's not just what we do, it's how we participate that really matters. And there are a couple of sides to this problem. It's not only the, someone's back there doing something. They're about to break through the wall here. It'll be very exciting. It's not only that very often we don't bring our best game to the table. And we all know this. I mean, how can we bring our best game every day? But we try to. It's not only that. Sometimes we bring so good a game that we're frustrated with what's out there. And Stan was talking about a guy that he's working with right now who's going to burn himself out because all his talents somehow can't be translated into the world where he can see it manifest. Is that a fair representation of that? So years ago, we realized the necessity of understanding process. And process was talked about first thing with John and Frank. It was all about process. This was the University of Connecticut Master Plan, which we did about 20 years ago. It was a $2.2 billion master plan, back when $1 billion meant something. Now, was it Bunker Hunt who said $1 billion isn't what it used to be? You don't want to swim in those waters. And it involved 5 campuses, about 20,000 faculty, students, staff, and a process that took place over about 2 years, where we interfaced with everyone from the president on down to the people who maintain the buildings and the town. Clearly, we needed a process in order to create a platform that was most conducive for the conversation we needed to have. And so we talked about that, and we came up with 4 planning principles. Initially, they were like 9 with all sorts of bullets and whatnot. We said, that is completely incomprehensible. Let's have there's 4. The 4th is at the bottom. And I think in the end, we felt it was the most important. This is an earlier iteration of it, which is that the joy of the process is revealed in the quality of the plan. Now, there are 2 words that very often or very rarely occur together: joy and process, particularly when you're talking about planning boards and a process with them. It eventually became the quality of the process is revealed in the quality of the plan. And that's quite a simple thing, but very elusive and very often something we don't pay attention to. So I'm going to talk about an analogous situation. We know that, and Rex last night talked about the extent of the problem that we're all facing and what we wish to improve, to make a wonderful place for our children to learn in. There is a tremendous amount of work to be done, and a lot of it is systemic, and we're on the receiving end of it. And I think it's extraordinary, some of the work that's been done, Ron, for example, with entrepreneurship embedded within a bureaucracy. Incredible idea, but it's inventive because we're trying to find a way to make the world a better place. Well, the problem with sustainability, I would argue, is even greater than the problem we have in our schools, though it might be neck and neck. A couple of years ago, I spoke at the National U.S. Green Building Council, or International U.S. Green Building Council conference. And at that particular time, 53% of the people in the United States did not think that climate change existed. Did not believe in it. So you can imagine the difficulty of conversations about what to do about it. So Hank Ovink, who came over a few years ago to consult after Hurricane Sandy and went down to New Orleans, and I don't know if you ran into him, but he is the director of, it says, spatial planning and water management in a country that's been dealing with it for centuries, over 500 years, successfully. He was brought over to get ideas about what the solutions might be. And we're all here, of course, to try to get solutions, understand what great practices there might be. Not only best practices, but great practices to make our schools something. Well, he came away with this as a summary, right? The problem is not the solutions. It's how we can get everyone to agree upon them. I would argue it begins at home with us. So Pogo and his friend have been tramping through the forest with increasing amounts of debris and end up at this pile in the middle of the forest. We have met the enemy, and he is us. So it's not the enemy, but it's the material that we have to work with. It's ourselves. And it's a formidable enemy because we know that we can be any one of these possibilities. And we are. We don't like to think we are. But I can say I am. I certainly last night, for a while during, I think Rex has left, during Rex's talk, I was a little bit down in the lower left-hand corner. I was going to fall over on, I would think I was sitting next to you. But internally, scroll up to the other upper right-hand corner. I found myself the other day in a meeting with someone who came in with a really great idea, and as they started in, I knew it was a non-starter. As they began talking about and elaborating it, internally, I was like this. I was wrong, as it turned out. Luckily, someone else was there who said, you know, there's something in that. Someone who saw the possibility. So my favorite, actually, is down in the lower right-hand corner. We have a series of design guidelines in our office, and they include a quote from him. They also include a quote from Voltaire. I love the fact that Wilson Pickett and Voltaire are living on the same list. Voltaire said, all styles are fine except the boring ones. There's another one that says, mistakes are creativity's last shot at spontaneity. Love that one. And Wilson Pickett, who said, don't fight it, feel it. So we have to remember that there are other dimensions of ourselves that we do not include in our everyday activities, in trying to make the best decisions. So very often we need a restart. And I was reminded by Carrie this morning that one of the ones we do is inviting people to be part of a conspiracy. Is Carrie here, by the way? No. And a conspiracy is when we all conspire. So I would suggest that all of us right now take 3 deep breaths together, right now. Everything's different. That was only 3 breaths. So these dimensions that most of our generation would think are these new agey ideas. And they're not. That's what we need. It's part of those soft system tools that we need to employ. The other thing I would say is, and I think all of you realize this, is no one can sit on the sidelines. There isn't an audience, and we just proved it right then, conspiring, breathing together, that this presentation, the quality of this presentation, is a sum total not only of what I present, but your attention to what you do, how you're listening. But this is particularly true in meetings. Now, this is a sage in the stage situation that we try to avoid. I was going to give actually, it was Alicia who suggested I give the presentation from back there. But I thought people would be looking back and forth, we'd all get a stiff neck. But we're all in it together. And we understand that. But generally out there, I'm sure you all feel the same way, that when we mention team, it means one thing to one person and something else to the other. When we were doing the Yukon Master Plan, we realized that collaboration was essential. Now, that was 20 years ago, and I have to say that collaboration was not a word that's used as often as it is now. And we wrote a book some 6 or 7 years ago, and at that time, the Harvard Business Review had 50 titles in their magazine. Only one had the word collaboration in it. That was only 7 years ago. Now it's absolutely everywhere. Now, the reason why we wrote this book is we had two problems. One, we thought we knew what collaboration was. And worse, we thought we were good at it. When we looked at it, we realized we sucked at it. Actually, we're not very good at it. In fact, even today, we can see how we need to improve how we actually talk about things together. So for the first time ever, we have Ptolemy and Miss Piggy on the same screen. Ptolemy, lamentably, is known for the one thing he got wrong. Now, can you imagine if you were known for the one thing you got wrong? Now, in my family, I am known for that because I suggested to my wife that though she wanted to go to a beach down south, I said, you know, it's really nice in Wales because we got this free house there and it's in July, it's going to be really great. 50 degrees and raining. I suppose that anyone in this room would be smarter than I was at that point. So 40 years later, I'm still thankfully married to this woman. I am known for that. Ptolemy was known for the fact that he said the Earth was the center of the universe. It took 1,300 years, 1,400 years to dislodge that idea. I would maintain that it still is not dislodged, as Miss Piggy would remind us. We are more often a pig in a pink dress than we would like to think. In fact, most of the time we wake up in the morning and that's where we are. I don't know if this has happened to you, but I got up the other morning and I couldn't find something that was really important to me, and I blamed my kids for taking it. Now, they have not been in the house for 10 years. Absolutely impossible. How could I have, I mean, just that was the first thing. It must have been them. Where, you know, Zach, did you take my, no. So this is, of course, how it is. In fact, that little ball on the left should be really, really small. We are a part of a particle of the whole. We're very, very small. But this is really how we think it is, arguably. This is how we think it is. And very often with good reason, because we know stuff, and there we go. So I want to deconstruct this just a little bit, and then I'm going to get into the project that I want to talk to you about. So first of all, it's really not what we do, it's how we participate. And this is one of the mottos in our office. How we are is what it becomes. We as architects like to think that out there, this building, and all of you out there have projects that you're working on. You have a ton of them, and you have a ton of them, Keith. They're out there. This is the thing we have to do. And you've articulated, we know also that it's not just the building out there, it's who's going to be in it. And then Julie reminded us that the single biggest roadblock, training people to be in them, the people that are actually in them. So how we are really is what it becomes. It is simply a result. Everything we do is a result of what's happening right now. What you're learning right now is going to be taken back. I take it down to as fine a grain as you want, and it is true. Secondly, that we have a responsibility. I think all of us feel that because we're on a mission. We all feel it. I would like to turn it around just to get a better sense of what that word actually means. It is our ability to respond. What's the difference between those two? Well, one, it's not out from the outside in. It's not a responsibility. It's to some outside call. It's not like our mother's asking us to make our beds. It's something we feel inside. And it's capabilities that we need to bring to the table. And lastly, and this one is a difficult one, if we're honest with ourselves, we actually don't know, but the first two as questions, we don't know how we are. And we don't know how to respond. We actually don't know what's needed. I mean, we have a pretty good idea because we have a lot of experience. We have an expertise, but I would argue that that expertise can actually get in the way of making truly innovative decisions. And I would say it's axiomatic. And it's axiomatic because we can't know this next step. If we know it, it's really not the next step. It's something of a rehashing of what we already have. So how to be free enough and leave a space for that not knowing. The other thing our expertise does when we walk into the room is other people don't participate as freely. I don't know if you've noticed that, but we have. So we have to work at it. And we particularly had to work at it in this next project. Excuse me, we went a little further. Oh, wait a minute, let's go back a little bit. I don't know how we got, was I just clicking away mindlessly and things were going on behind me? How did we get to that? That's where we want to be. Were we seeing all these slides back here? I was just clicking away? No, thank goodness. I don't know how I jumped to that. We got an RFP in 2013 that floored us, that we didn't think we could respond to. We did eventually and made it to the interview. And then the question is, what do you say? This is 6 months after that happened. What this billboard that came up just days after that tragedy said, these were the waters that they chose. Talk about choosing the waters you swim in. These are the waters that they chose. Changed everything, as far as I'm concerned, about what happened after that. How they responded, how people in the rest of the country, what lesson that was for them in facing any of the traumas that they have. So in approaching this interview, we had to admit to ourselves that we did not know what was needed, nor did they. It was a risky proposition, given the fact that we're architects and we were surrounded by guys going after this job who came in with models and all sorts of stuff. But it was the right approach. Even after we began working with them, they were concerned about this process being too inclusive. I don't know why this keeps going. There we go. So this is the very first meeting that we had. And it was 50 people. We've never had we've been doing this at that particular point for about 20 years. We had a process that we took schools through that, not unlike what, I get all the names of everyone, I will come up with it, was sitting up on the stage just moments before, who said that they had an architect come in to go through the specifications. Who was that? Someone in the room. Brett, thank you. And what an incredible idea. We have tried to do that from the very beginning, to go through specifications. It becomes more and more difficult now because they're given and you can't change them. But going through and really understanding them is absolutely the right thing to do. In this circle with 50 people, we realized that we couldn't approach the decisions we had to make without having a process where people felt once again part of the community. This was a community that was really fractured. And we began with the most simple of questions. We asked them not about the school and what needed to be in it. In fact, we put that off for about a month, much to the consternation of the project manager, who said, we're running towards this deadline. But we knew if we didn't have an ambiance, an atmosphere of trust, of respect, that we couldn't make the best decisions. We did a fair amount of conspiring with all kinds of things, like the icebreakers that guy came up with. And we did it with them. But the question that we asked them, first of all, was this: what do you love about your home and your community? What do you love about your home and your community? Bring in images of that. They needed to be reminded of that in the face of what had happened. The next session went on for 3.5 hours. It was extraordinary. One person after another getting up, talking about what they loved. That dynamic changed the course of everything that went after. Several things happened. One, they talked about what they loved. They talked from here. They talked from here. And people listened and heard it. And that listening also was an important aspect, because that listening is paying attention to somebody else. Now, on an everyday level, what's happening right now, we are always in circumstances where someone is speaking and theoretically we are listening. Like collaboration, it's something we do really poorly, in fact. Typically, we're listening to ourselves, right? Thich Nhat Hanh calls it radio station NTS, or NST, radio station NST, radio station non-stop talking, which is right up in here. To really listen, which happens when people speak from a place that isn't habitual, it's entirely different. We hear it, and we ourselves feel it. And it's transformative. And it creates the circumstances, not unlike the breathing that we just did, that allows us to have a totally different conversation. And all of you in the room, I know, have been in those circumstances where somehow, for one reason or another, the chemistry is right, that the waters are different. Your water and everyone else's water is different. I would argue that we can be more intentional about that. It's something we don't talk about, and it's not easy to talk about, but it's something we can be more intentional about. The little devices make a huge difference, and we use them again and again. Have people stand up and sit down together, all sorts of things. And they seem trivial, and they seem sometimes in the way of getting on with decision making. I can assure you they're not. Because they get us off this railroad track of making decisions based on how we think it ought to go, as opposed to what needs to happen. So the conversations that we had around the design of the building, which happened then the next month and the month after and on, could happen in an entirely different way. And it was a process of remembering the community. One of the images that came up again and again was this one on the left, of the buildings that were rising out of the undulating hills of Connecticut, of Newtown. And it entered into the design. All of them felt connected to the way the building looked. It was representative of these rolling hills and the towers coming out, directly related to what they felt. It was not only that their ideas were in the building, by the way. It was the loop of having been heard and having a hand in what was created. All of us here, and this has been said more than once by people sitting up here or standing up here, people wish to serve. Ron and I were talking about this. People wish to serve. They, however, need to hear the call very often. And in going through job applications, you give them the call. So part of the session before last has to do with that, recognizing that something is needed. One of the other aspects that got in was the Pawtucket River that runs through the town of Newtown and these bridges across them. And we use that to create bridges, metaphoric bridges, into the school. The water metaphor connects to that spur of the Housatonic that created the Sandy Hook, after which the school is named. Connects also all the way up into Canada, and of course into the oceans of the entire world, reconnecting this community to the community of the planet. As importantly, it also created a barrier in front of the school. Now, that's not what we pointed out, because that discussion about this topic was so incendiary, as you can well imagine. It's everywhere. And I know all of us in this room struggle with not spending enormous amounts of money on things we know will not make the school actually more safe. This is one of the most difficult problems I think we face. Because if you're putting money into 100 cameras instead of 30 cameras, you may not have a music room. First of all, you don't have someone looking at those cameras, but you can't have that conversation right at the beginning. You can't have that conversation at the beginning. It can only come much later when a larger conversation is made possible by opening up the discussion. This school, by the way, was an award-winning school, not an award-winning prison, back in the 1970s. This is how they faced the problem of security back in the 1970s. It's the Columbus School. And we replaced it with a school that had a lot of glass in it. One that, by the way, on the tour that we took with the building committee from Sandy Hook, and we took the teachers on, they said, oh, we can't have this. We can't have a school with glass. And in fact, the policeman who was stationed right in Fairhaven, where this school happened, or where this school was built, and where we were building the school with a lot of glass, said, oh boy, you got a problem here. We had one incident during the course of construction, and after that, over the last 10 years, 0. The community takes care of these buildings. And at Sandy Hook, to have an open environment like this one that goes out into nature. And these tree houses that go out and look at the trees that are in the back. Finally, I want to talk about another part of the team. The team that very often when we even describe what the team is, we don't include enough of the people who are actually part of this team but are unnamed. When I was in architecture school, a guy I knew was working for IMP when he was doing the East Wing of the National Gallery in Washington. And he told me a story that really stuck with me. Stuck with me all the way to oh, excuse me, we've got kids build first. I should look at these slides more carefully. I'm going to finish the IMP story and I'm going to come back to this. IMP pulled in all the people who were going to work on the building, some close to 500 people in an auditorium in Washington with models, drawings, to bring them into the process of what it means to make a school. Can you imagine if you were a laborer and you were brought into a meeting like this and one of the greatest architects in the world was saying, thank you for being here. And I need your help to make a gift to the American people. Doug Gardner, my friend, said he was on site as a job captain, young kid. And he would be there at 5, 6 o'clock at night, and some of the laborers were still there cleaning the building while it was being constructed. Still there. 3 o'clock they get off. They're there 2-3 hours later. Not unlike the story about Sundays working for free. So if people are connected to it, they do it. So here are our clients, really, our users, certainly. We ask the kids what they want the school to be like in every project we've done for the last 20-some years, and we've gotten some really wonderful responses. Interestingly enough, the most creative responses are the kids who are kindergartners, and it gets less creative going on. So how many people in the room are creative? Could everyone raise their hand, please? Thank you very much. Every one of you is creative. That's an extraordinary thing, that we don't feel that we're creative. You ask kindergartners, every one of them will raise their hand. Unfortunately, as they go through the grades and they get up to high school, they're only about 10%. Holy smokes. And creativity being the most important thing we need these days. What are we doing to these poor children? Oh my God. Well, here we are, children. Get your hand up and be creative. And that's to a certain extent what we did in this process, that we empowered people to become more creative. And God, they were fabulous. Do not be afraid of getting input, and do not be afraid of process. And I think most of you realize that. But it's hard to convince others of it. Somehow, it takes longer, that little bit of process. But in the decision-making overall, it does not take longer. We know this to be true. So we bring the kids in for all sorts of things. And during Sandy Hook, we met with the high school kids as well as the kindergartners in projects that connected them to the remaking of their community. And it was a process that went through everyone. The parents came. It was extraordinary. And they became ambassadors for the schools and the school in a way that you could not possibly have seen without that process. And so in this particular case, what we did was, because the school was based on putting learning into the trees, learning in nature. And Betsy and I were talking about this earlier, about how important nature is. Actually, you were the one who brought it up, how important nature is to us as human beings. It's called biophilia, and most of you here probably know about that. So in this really simple exercise, which was so much fun, God, everyone from my office loved to be part of these. And we ended up coming with paint all over ourselves and whatnot. I remember this little girl, we were doing a little birdhouse, and she said, "Could you hold this while I paint it?" And she didn't distinguish really my arm and my hand from the birdhouse at all. And I appeared at a conference it was the next night, in fact. And I was holding my hand up, and I could see people were looking at me, and the entire back of my hand was covered in this paint that I could not get off. Anyway, in this particular case, we had these elements of nature, and they would pick up, say, a leaf, and one would hold the leaf. This is really marvelous, little kids. One would hold a leaf, one would hold a flashlight, and the other would draw. And then they'd switch. And they'd end up with drawings like this. They were like Matisse's. They were just absolutely marvelous. And eventually were translated into carvings. So we're working with a wonderful company, and it looked like this. And then it ended up on the building. And the metaphoric relationship was that these windows were the trunks of the trees to the canopy of the facade, and these wooden panels were like hearts carved into the trunks of the trees. The families of the kids who were involved in this, when this school opened, all went around and looked at every one of these. And there weren't that many on the facade, but if you can see it in the lower left-hand corner, it's fairly modest, but it was a wonderful addition and connected them. So getting back to IMPay, we felt it was really important to include those who wanted to help, who wanted to be a part of this, who were hired eventually to work on the school, to be included in it. And very early on, we brought them in for the first session. And these were the guys who were the site work guys, who wouldn't be there at the end of the project. And we spent the morning talking about the hopes and dreams of this community. One of the guys who owned a company that laid the pipes came up, tears in his eyes, saying, "I never see the schools that I contribute to. I never see them. I'm never shown what they're about." And he said, "This is so meaningful for me, because I can go back and tell my family that I worked on this school, and this is what it's about." So this session took place a year or so later when the school was up, by and large, and this took place in the gymnasium, maybe 100 of the contractors. And the woman in the lower right, now here, Pat Lodra, how she was mattered throughout this entire process. What she said that day was, I thought, extraordinary. She, like IMPay, thanked them and said, "You have no idea what this means to this community. It's like a phoenix rising from the ashes. And she said, here is my wish. My wish is that the love that you have for what you do will be in this building. And when the students come, when these children come to learn, they will feel that love. They will feel that love. So it's all a circle, and it's about resonance. So that all of you who are involved in doing schools are touching so many different people. And the things that you embody, the things that you care about, resonate with others. That makes a difference. I know that when each of you walk into the room, if you care about what it is you do, it can be transformative for everyone else, even those who are like this in the room. All the way from the planning board meetings to the construction trailer, it makes a difference. How we are matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barry. Excellent talk. Yeah, time for a couple of questions.
You're all stunned. It's not an easy topic, is it? It's a squirrely one. Yes, thank you, Paul.
How long was the process in terms of warming up to the conversation to where you had where the direction you were going to head in terms of how this building might manifest itself, and then how long to actually put that building together?
They had a construction timetable that was overall from September, October of 2013, and the school was occupied last year, 2016. So it was about 3 years. But what we began with was, the first project was taking down the existing school. It was one of the most difficult parts of the project, which I didn't talk about. It required more security than the FBI regional headquarters that we did, because of what they were afraid would happen taking the school down, the debris, and where it would go. So the specifications were a foot thick in terms of who could work on the job and what would happen and everything else. We couldn't get to the school itself until that was done. So we did some preliminary. We put the SBBAC, the School-Based Building Advisory Committee, that's what we called it, together in September and October. And then we began to meet. We talked in the greatest generalities we could for the first month, as I was saying, before we got to the decisions about what the school would actually look like. So as much as possible, we talked about characteristics that people wanted in the school. We did talk a lot about the site, and that was a very challenging piece of it that we didn't anticipate. The end date didn't change, as we know. So we had to negotiate our way through that. I would say the school was designed probably in about 9 to 10 months, the entire design process. And then construction began. So it was accelerated. I would say it was faster than most of the schools that we do, which are on, as you know, usually by the time it gets to doing the school, it's already later than it should be. And you have to move pretty quickly. So it was about that, yeah.
And a follow-up, how many families were involved in the planning process?
Well, you have to understand that the families, except for 1 or 2, would not have children in this school. So there wasn't a tremendous amount of interest. But we presented to them on more than one occasion, particularly about exactly where the incident happened, which was protected. And we went through a whole process with them about how we wouldn't call attention to it, in fact. But it would be integrated. It would be protected. It would be an area of grass and trees. But it wouldn't be indicated because we created another one, another area in the parking lot that was parallel to it. So it wasn't called out, but it was respected. So beyond that, there wasn't a tremendous amount of interface with the families, except for the memorial, that was a whole separate project, as well it should be, at the insistence, by the way, of the first select person. Yes.
Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Out of time, but we
Out
have
of time.
one last question before we eat. Everyone's going to eat.
One quick question.
But
and then-
Mareka's going to ask a question.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you touched on security. Was that something that came from the school itself, from their sort of posture towards being more transparent, or did you really have to do a lot of work to try to get them to a point where they didn't want to build a bunker? What was that conversation?
That was the latter. The question was what sort of process was there to get to the point where we talk about security? And we had to go through, that was probably the longest period of time we needed to focus on. So we didn't have bulletproof glass all the way around the ground floor, a whole host of things, and glass. But to have them understand what the nature of security really is, having to do with deter, detect, defend, there's one other. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Barry.
Thank you all very much. Let's eat.
Thank you.